This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, API Audio, JZ Microphones, Spectra 1964, and Isotope. In fact, you're hearing my voice right now through the JZ Pop filter on the JZ BB29 microphone, through the Spectra 1964 STX600 mic pre-complementer, and Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
Very early on, working in a studio in New York, I was like, oh my God, there's just so much to learn. How could you possibly learn it all? I remember just like fishing through all the parameters on a Lexicon PCM 70 or all the things on a 480. And then at one point I realized, you don't have to learn everything about everything. In fact, who gives a shit about a PCM 70? And I felt better.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence, pushing USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. JZ Mics brings you the ultimate futuristic pop filter for your studio, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The JZ pop filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while allowing important high frequencies for clarity. Plus, it looks super cool and you're hearing my voice on it right now. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off this amazing pop filter from jzmic.com.
When I master a song, I'm immersed and committed to a sonic fidelity from start to beyond finished. Hi, I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. My goal in every master is to help you prepare so that you're not compromising your timeline, budget, or your mix. My iterative process helps build a relationship with you so that you don't have to ever second-guess your mix. Let's pull back the curtains on mastering because there's no secrets here. Send me your mix and I'll give you free feedback or a free master demo. Just hit me up at soundporter.com.
Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw. Welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guests today, I have two guests on the show, are Donald Mitchell and Peter Cadis. Donald plays vocals, guitar, and banjo with the band Darlingside, who have just finished their newest record, Fish Pond Fish, and Peter is a producer and engineer at Tarquin Studios, a 7,000-foot Victorian home in Bridgeport, Connecticut, that has been transformed into a residence and recording studio for musicians. Beautiful place. Fish Pond Fish is an album that brings together acoustic folk instruments with the cool band sounds of indie rock under a lush bed of vocal harmonies, and is self-described as a story of geology, meteorology, ornithology, astronomy, and botany, an album that catalogues the weird nooks of our world with the same curiosity of a botanist's time-worn field journal. That's cool. I'm glad I made it through saying botanist. That's a hard word for me to say. Peter's many credits include Death Cab For Cutie, Frightened Rabbit, Gang of Youths, Interpol, The National, The Head and the Heart, and Kurt Weill, to name a few. And in 2017, Cadis and Chris Frantz of Talking Heads launched a concert series for emerging artists at the Fairfield Theater Company. I want to give a thank you also and a shout out to Martina over at Music Marcom for making our connection and introduction. Please welcome Donald Mitchell and Peter Cadis to Recording Studio Rockstars. Fellas, are you ready to rock?
Yeah,
Sure.
yes.
Yeah, we
That's
forgot.
actually an old joke where, old bandmates of my brother, Tarquin, he once said, "Are you ready to rock?" And they said, I guess so.
I guess
which is
so.
the wrong answer. But yes, we are very ready to rock. Don, what do you say? How many cups of coffee have you had?
Well, I'm a decaf guy, Peter, but I've had extra decaf today.
Excellent.
Right on. Well, I'm glad you guys just established which voice is which for the audience. So that's great. Thank you for doing that.
Okay. Well, yeah, this is Peter. The other guy's Don.
That's the best way to do it. Instead of Don saying who he is, you just say the other guy's Don.
I just don't like dead air. I jump in right away. So
groovy. Well, let me see. Well, I mean, we don't really have an established way to kind of go back and forth, so you guys can jump in on things, but I'll see if I can point some questions in different directions. Let me start with you, Don. Tell us more about Darlingside. Where are you guys? What was the story behind Fish Pond Fish? Is this a record that you guys made this year with all the other challenges going on in 2020?
Yeah. This record was made with all those challenges in mind. Backing up a little bit, Darlingside is a vaguely Boston-based indie folk band. We've been together about a decade. This was our first album working with Peter down at Tarquin Studios in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And yeah, we started recording it in January, I want to say. No, sorry, it was before that. It must have been.
It was in November.
November. We had another session in January. We were kind of trying to split it up into EPs because we were all feeling intimidated by, the LP and the sort of the full majesty of that putting too much pressure on us. So we decided we're gonna break this into a few smaller EPs and trick ourselves into recording an album. And the only problem with that was we didn't anticipate that before that last EP's worth came around, we entered a global pandemic and had to then try to reinvent the whole process on a fully remote basis. So that's an exciting thing we can get into or spare everyone the details of at your discretion, Lidge.
No, we'll probably get into that because we love to hear about ways that you were able to work together. And who knew that the fear of an EP versus a long playing album would be eclipsed by a greater fear.
Yes.
Oh man. Yeah. So I hate making albums. It's just so overwhelming. So when a band comes in and says, we just want to make an EP or record a song or two, that sounds fantastic to me.
Really? Because you made so many albums that seem so coherent too,
Well, I've been very unhappy for a long time. No, it's all joking aside, it is just sometimes it becomes more about just finishing than about, making art. So that's kind of what is a drag to me. I think the way that we approached it was really smart. And also taking the hardest thing in the world to do as a mixer is, engineer and mixer and producers record, mix it, you're done, with no time to sort of look back at it. So I liked a lot that we broke it up into 2-week blocks, throughout a 6-month period. But the real twist is that final 2 weeks wasn't able to happen in person. And fortunately, we were pretty close to the end. We were doing pretty well. A lot of what was left really primarily was the guys' vocals. And I'd say these guys are different than not all bands, but a lot of bands in that they're very, very, very particular about how they sing, about their voices in terms of everything, the sound, the expression, the balances between each other. And what this weird remote situation made possible was actually to let them take more control of that. Mm-hmm. So they each, I believe, Don, recorded the rest of their vocals, a large percentage of them by themselves, not even together, just by themselves individually. But then when it was time to send them to me, they created the panning and the balances that between all the harmonies that really needed to be right. They presented them to me with those levels already set, which made my job a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, listening to the record, a lot of my questions immediately are just about the vocals because they're so striking, and I think of all the examples of, how difficult it can be to accomplish the exact right blend or even just sing in tune well. Obviously the singing is fantastic on this. So tell us more about that. What did you guys have as far as recording setups? And what were the things that made it really easy for you guys to each record yourselves or challenges? Did you guys have similar setups or different ones?
We sort of over the years have amassed a decent amount of gear that we then, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we decided, okay, we can't keep ourselves and our families safe, without splitting up. We kind of also split up the gear temporarily and invested in a couple new pieces. We got a couple, like Apollo twins going, just things where we could kind of make sure that whichever person in their location had sort of the worst setup, that we could bring it up to a certain like baseline so that everything would sound professional enough. I mean, I think one reason that worked on this album was that we came to Peter initially with demos that we were hoping were going to be a way of establishing the key and the tempo and giving us a form that we could make some decisions about before we got to the studio, and then assuming we would retrack almost everything. But Peter was really interested right off the bat in working from some of those demo sounds. So there already was a good amount of home recording from especially Dave's home in Waltham, which is where we were rehearsing at the time. So, there's the occasional dog barking in the background and, Dave's kid ambling through at one point. And like, there's definitely some things, and we comped around it where we could, but there's definitely some artifacts from that we just accepted as part of the process. And we had already done that before we got to the pandemic. And then obviously it got even more, like make the best of it. So, all of us just had to have basically one good channel. So each of us just made sure we had a good mic and a good preamp and maybe like an acoustic panel or two. And then combine that with some clever hanging of blankets, over closet doors and all sorts of things like that. And yeah, we did the last 3 songs worth of vocals where we couldn't be together in the same space at all, which for us was really hard because we're not a band that has one dominant lead presence so much as like on a lot of songs, it's sort of a group lead where either we're singing in unison for parts or it's sort of the harmony stack itself. Like the harmonies are meant to be louder rather than being just a supporting thing. And so we've even, we recorded some things on this album during the early stages before the pandemic hit around one microphone. We do background vocals a lot with, an Omni microphone and just standing around it and getting the actual expression together that way. So taking that tool away from us, which it has been really important, on if you listen to earlier records like Birds Say in particular, our 2015 record, you can hear a lot of LCR vocals where we've got 4 close mic'd vocals up the center, maybe panned out just slightly, like 5 or 10. And then we have one mono omni take of the 4 of us singing all the same parts, hard left, and another take of it hard right. So it's sort of a modified LCR, Crosby, Stills, Nash vocal. That was sort of where we started in our sort of folk harmonizing sound. So it did mean that we had to go with a more personal kind of split out sound on some of the later tunes on this record. And I think that was a good thing. And it pushed us, and it also got us up to speed with better home recording across the board so that we'll be able to collaborate and write remotely in the future as our lives take us in different directions. So it was a cool thing.
Did somebody lend you a really snazzy vintage microphone?
They sure did. I mean, and it was partly born out of some really crazy radio signals that come through that mic at his studio in Bridgeport, Connecticut. We won't name any names here.
I thought it was pure generosity, but no, I have one of the first really like fancy mics I ever bought years ago was a Neumann M49, which is, like was their flagship mic, even like was supposed to be even better than the U47. That's very, very debatable. But
does that have the red jewel in it, or is that the M50?
It does. It does. Yeah, the M50 I think is Omni only, and this one has sort of everything. But it's a great mic. But for some reason in my studio, it gets really just terrible RF. We be 108 FM. Whoa, so it's terrible. So.
And Connecticut radio isn't so good that it makes up for it?
No, not even close. But anyway, so you guys still have that mic, which is cool because I haven't thought about it much in recent years. And then I saw a thing on Reverb where someone was selling one that looks just like mine and everything for like $16,000. I was like, whoa, Don, please take care of that mic. So.
I thought you were afraid Don was selling it. It's been a tough year, guys.
Don, stop selling my stuff while you're
I realized
at the studio.
it was my mic. No. But I wanted to say too, in the beginning, I think it was funny how you guys seemed really surprised that I thought that your demo recordings were good, like good enough to use. And I'm like, yeah, they sound good to me. I mean, all those guys that are decent engineers, and they have some decent microphones and preamps, and they perform into them, and it sounds good. Like some types of recording are so tricky. Like recording a full drum kit with a lot of mics. I mean, that takes some experience to sort of figure out. So yeah, and in general, I love when bands come in with demos that we can work from, because it's the hardest thing in a record really is just getting started sometimes. And then you go and you redo all their things that they did, and they go, well, I don't know if it's as cool as the demo. It's like, well, I don't want to even enter into that fight. So if the demo is cool, let's start there.
Yeah. Now, so there's a lot of the stuff. You guys seem to have a real affinity for looping things that seem like they might be loops, or they just have rhythmic qualities. I can't tell if they're delays. No loops. All right. Okay. Well, so there's a lot of cool stuff in there that is,
Or you tell me, Don, are there loops?
I mean, I think the song Ocean Bed would be a notable exception. That has a loop on it.
Okay. And then what are elements of the demo that show up feeling like, let's start from this?
I'll defer to you there, Don. What are some?
Well, like that song Ocean Bed. I mean, we could start with that. That's a good example where the loop, which I think there were maybe 6 or 7 layers of kind of tapping on a desk and hitting a music stand with a pen and clapping and thumping a chest mic'd up close and stuff like that. That we used sort of as a groove track, just rather than always tracking to the click. And for that song, we had thought about, especially going in to record with Peter. One of the albums we really liked that Peter had done in the past was Jonsi's album Go. Mm-hmm. Am I pronouncing that right, Peter?
Yeah, Jonsi, the lead singer, Jonsi Birgersson from Sigur Rós.
Cool. So it's this really jubilant, amazing record that also has these really vibey drum sounds on it, or percussion sounds, I guess I should say. I mean, maybe after I finish my brief story, Peter could tell you a little bit about that, because that was an amazing thing to hear about the process of figuring out those sounds. But we had seen a live video of the acoustic tour from that record, where they tried to sort of recreate some of those polyrhythmic percussion sounds, but all just playing in a bookstore. So. Right. Jonsi is playing, a ukulele and singing, and then he's got kind of the guys there, and they're tapping on their knees and they're slapping their leg and hitting their chest and things. So we kind of got inspired by that as we were thinking about what's at the intersection of what Darlingside has done in the past and what Peter has done in the past. And so on that tune, we came in with this loop, being like, maybe we'll use some of the layers from this. Maybe we'll use none of them. Maybe we'll replace it all with live drums. We weren't really sure what we were going to do with it, but we ended up using a hybridized approach where we kind of start and end with the loop. And in the middle, for portions, the live drums take over from it. And it strips back to maybe just 1 or 2 of the most basic, 8th note layers of that loop. Sort of like an EDM approach almost, where, you just, every section you have a part that gets muted down and another one that gets brought in, and they're all really simple, and you don't necessarily notice, except that the section overall feels new and different. So we kind of tried to use that layered approach for the percussion, because we don't have a drummer in our band. So it's totally up for grabs what you want to do with it. So on a lot of these ones, we came in with rehearsal drum tape. Even of this drummer who we had been chatting with beforehand, and his name is Ben Burns, and we wanted to bring him in. So we did these rehearsals, and we just did a mono mic on those. But some of those ones also, Peter was thinking, maybe this is cool if we pan out the instruments around it and kind of get a chamber vibe with that. But then maybe the drums are just up the center, and we can affect it, and we can kind of really, really keep it localized to the center and let the other, let the vocals be big and wide around it. And in other cases, we straight up replaced it. So it was just totally case by case was my memory of it.
Yeah,
there's more than one song where the core drums are your demo with one mic, but it's sort of an interesting trashy room sound. And then it just we added another drum kit and another percussion over it in certain sections, and it goes away in certain stuff like that. So that's always fun to do because it just mixes up the sonics too. Not everything is a drum kit with 14 mics on it.
Yeah. You guys have a very cool, like the snare really sounds great on the stuff I'm hearing too. And like 2 songs I wrote down, February Stars, Green and Evergreen, both of those had distinct drum sounds to them. There's this great marching snare kind of coming in on Green and Evergreen. And I'm wondering if that's what you're talking about with this drummer and the single mic stuff.
That's one of the songs, right, Don? But the marchy stuff is the overdub, I think, right?
The marchy stuff, I remember going back and forth on that very issue of the sort of the demo chasing thing where there were some issues, I think, with the initial track. It was a little bit loose because we were thinking of it as like, just do a couple takes and we'll build up this demo around it, not finessing it. And then we did replace it with a tighter snare at Tarquin. And there were sort of sections, I think we ended up using both at different points in the song potentially, because at certain points it was tight enough on the original one that it worked in spare moments. But then once the production got more built up, there were other sections where you just needed it to be a little bit cleaner sounding.
You may already know that iZotope creates the very best smart plugins for mixing and mastering. But did you know that now you can get them all through iZotope's new affordable subscription bundles? Get Music Production Suite Pro for only $24.99 per month, or Producers Club for only $19.99 per month. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. The Spectra 1964 BBDI Passive Direct Box is perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 complementer, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. But what if you want to record direct keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI 2 with custom wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad at Spectra1964.com. Now, you guys you talked about using the UAD Apollos as part of your recording chain. Do you guys all use the same DAW to record in? Are you guys messing around with UAD Luna for any of this stuff? Or are you in Pro Tools and things like that?
I think we predate Luna, or this process predates Luna. So, but yeah, it did help a lot that we all had Universal Audio stuff. Because, well, I feel like when I started doing this in the old days, you'd record your record and then you would mix your record. And now the way Pro Tools works is you can start mixing as you go. That used to be kind of a weird term, but now I think it's legitimate. So, I think that when we had to go remote, the fact that those guys had a lot of the same plugins that I do, they could hear the mixes sort of as we'd heard them in my studio, as opposed to, you take all the plugins off and it doesn't sound like much. It's like a guitar solo. Well, turn off all the distortion. It's like, oh, what is that? So Don can comment, but I think he mentioned recently that, just the fact, even on songs that I hadn't mixed yet, he would take my mix bus and all the plugins that were on it and put it on that. And it was, that sounds much more like what we experienced at the studio. So,
and even with the loops that aren't loops, are those things that you would add plugins to and kind of like disguise the sounds a little bit? Because a lot of those things, like I'm hearing it and it's it has a mysterious quality to it.
There's a lot of manipulation. Sorry, go ahead, Don.
Oh, yeah. I think, that's something I think we share with Peter, which is like hybridized sounds that are multiple things that sort of become something more mysterious and indistinct at times, and also just things that sound more deliberately affected in certain ways, I think is a really good thing. In particular with like our vocals being so prominent, sometimes a really hi-fi, 14 mic drum kit, that sound, if you went for it being perfect, it could compete more. Mm-hmm. And we had that experience on some of our very earliest stuff when we did have a drummer in the band. So I think we were a little scared of that. So we probably nudged things in a sort of dark, mysterious direction with especially some of those percussion sounds. And I think that honestly, that lines up really well. And it's one reason we felt confident to bring drums and percussion back into our sound a little more, was because Peter is so known for that and so good with working with dark sounds that are still impactful.
Yeah.
Like they're not just muffled and crummy sounding. They're like looming in the right way without being muddy, and that's a really impressive line to toe, I think.
Is anybody looking for that crummy sound anymore?
Oh, everyone likes crummy sounds now. It used to be cool, but I will say I've never worked with a band that asked me to turn the drums down as much or as often as Darlingside. So
wow,
it was kind of funny, especially one member. But yeah, so part of my thing is like I like to, even in mellow, thoughtful music, I like a slightly muscular drum sound, and that does exist on the record. But sometimes I guess it was a little too macho, and we just kept dialing it back. But the more you dial back a punchy drum beat, the more it leaves room for everything else. So yeah. I grew to accept it. So.
And then when you do add things like the drum kit and the kick and the snare too, it really cuts through the loops in a nice way. What was I going to ask you about? I want to hear more about the vocals too. So was the M49 a mic that you guys would just sort of trade off depending on who was singing, or did you guys each choose your own mic to sing your vocal parts on and then recombine things later?
Well, the Connecticut radio intrusions persisted in a couple of our homes in Waltham, but not in mine. So I kind of inherited that particular microphone and found one of the Apollo Unison preamp things that complemented it well enough, and just went to town with that. Wall, for instance, mm-hmm. Dave, who was at our previous rehearsal spot, he kind of continued on with a Neumann U87 that had this tube modification to it. So that kind of was our closest thing to a 47, which is what we had recorded a lot of things with at Peters. And then from there, we kind of went like, I'm trying to think what Harris did primarily.
Can I say something quickly? Although I don't want anyone listening to this to think, oh man, your vocals sound good because you had an M49 and a U47 and a U87. The older I get and the more I do this, the less significant I think those things are. Mm-hmm. You could have just said an SM7 and an RE20 or whatever, and it could be just as good a record. I firmly believe that.
Okay, so cool.
I never want anyone to think that like not having the fanciest vintage gear should hold you back in any way.
Well, so let's pivot to the things that do matter in a vocal. So, because I feel like I hear those evidently on the record. And I wonder, Don, if you want to talk about things that you learned about recording your voice so that you felt comfortable. I know the experience of putting on headphones, and next thing you know, I'm doing something that's different than what I was doing a moment ago. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that and how to find the comfort zone so that you really record the best thing that you can.
Yeah. Just I'll also say that, as I was describing those first two microphones, the other microphones that the other two guys were using are way less famous, expensive microphones. So even within the context of our band, we had always had this feeling we should all use this 87. It's our nicest mic, right? Mm-hmm. And we had in the past always done that. And on this one, I think it actually sounds cool how it's differentiated. Like Harris was typically using, a less expensive microphone, and Oyan was using, I think, a 4033, the Audio-Technica mic. Sort of a really just nice, solid, reliable, mid-level mic. And so yeah, I think that all worked out great. And I think it definitely the biggest adjustment was we're used to doing overdubs on our own after a song is already really up and running, and we already have the first vocal pieces done at the studio, and now we're doing like layers of harmony, maybe some atmospheric oohs and ahs and sort of more experimental things that tend to work better actually off the clock sometimes when you don't feel like you have any pressure on your time.
Mm-hmm.
So I always try to create situations where the band can do that, work off the clock.
Yeah.
God, I mean, standing in the control room with people staring at you, let's take it again. It's like, oh, anyway, terrible.
Yeah, right. So in that way, we were very used to it. And I mean, at least for me, I try to have the lighting not be too terrible because that tends to make you feel very exposed. I try to have some blankets and absorbent things up so that I don't get too much room sound. I mean, in addition to the acoustic panels that I've put up, and that I think makes as big a difference as any microphone, is just not having an untreated boxy room with things slapping around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I think closing your eyes sometimes helps. I always put an ear out. And on this recording, I figured out that through the monitoring with the console app, through Apollo, I found that actually I had issues sometimes with bleed in the past from the headphone mix, because I would have one ear totally out. So that headphone would be getting back into the microphone. But on this one, I realized, like, why don't I just throw it all into my left ear and try that, or find some in-between point to reduce bleed. So that was an interesting trick that I started using for the first time on this one. I think just varying the distance from the microphone when you're doing layers of background vocals was a good thing. I think using, like, I've never had multiple preamps like Peter does at Tarquin, where he can choose flavors, and that's great. I've never had like a choice between a bunch of different pre's that I can say, oh, I want, I want a 1073 on this, but I want a tube pre on this other thing. Like, I think I've never had that, but that was a good thing with the Unison preamps on the Apollo, was that I can just trade them out. So every time I do a new layer of a vocal, I'm experimenting now with the low background vocal, and now I'm going to try the high one. It's just flip over to a different pre. Even if you're kind of like, well, that's not necessarily better. It's different. And so over time, as you're building things up, you get a little more variety, and it doesn't feel quite as much like a buildup of the same resonant frequency or whatever is going on in your particular chain. So I think that was a good thing. And
what about
as far
volume?
as comfort,
What about just like volume level in the headphones? What have you learned about that?
Don't play it too loudly.
Yeah, exactly. I think not playing it too loudly. I also found on this recording process, and maybe Peter will call me out for some of my tracks having a little more bleed than usual, but I did some of these. If I was having a hard time, I used open-backed headphones. Whoa. And I kept the volume really low and just sang softly, and like that for tuning, just not having the pressure of the closed back earphones was a lot more like singing in the room with the guys. And I found that was cool. And even if it meant that I had to mute down some percussive elements and like just sing with pretty much the vocal stem, that for tuning I thought was a pretty cool thing. But generally, just don't blast it too loud.
Yeah, let me ask a question regarding that. So you guys have already talked about how you're sort of mixing it as you go, yet you're also describing the classic quandary of completely butchering that mix and creating a whole new thing so that you can sing an overdub part. Anything you've learned about, any benefits or pitfalls as far as like, okay, this works for me to do the overdub right now, but it doesn't sound like the way the song's going to sound anymore until I remix it back to the way it should sound?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times parts of a production will trip people up when they're trying to do their vocal, or if they're just trying to do some other kind of overdub. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with muting out anything that's a distraction, and then bringing it back in. I think that's no big deal at all.
Okay. And then you just sort of rebuild the mix quickly to double check that it's really stacking up the way you want it to.
It's nothing, fancy rebuilding. It just, let's unmute these things,
Okay.
But I was going to say, just as an aside to what you were mentioning earlier, about like microphones and just, again, stressing how unimportant it is to have the most, the fanciest microphones. I made a lot of records with that band, The National, and the very first one was a record called Sad Songs for Dirty Lovers, and that was 2002. I didn't record that. A guy named Nick Lloyd recorded it, and they came to me to mix it. He'd done all his vocals on this one of those blue mics, but like the blue bottle mic, but their most expensive one. I don't know, it's like $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 mic, and they sounded really good. But especially the lead-off track, Matt's voice, really deep baritone. It sounded just like $1 million. Like, man, that mic sounds good on this one. Like, oh no, we didn't use that mic on that. We used our Studio Project C1, which is a $200 condenser mic. So there you go.
Yeah, and I mean, what I've discovered about my own voice is, I love setting up a fancy vocal chain, but sometimes, I can record on it. I was messing around with the Spire Studio from Isotope, a songwriting thing, and just setting that, a foot away from me and just singing the right way and in tune and with the right kind of attitude made a much bigger difference, which is, I think, what you're getting at too, which is just the importance of what's getting recorded more so than the microphone that it's getting recorded through in that moment.
And again, quickly, I remember my first day recording a rather well-known band I won't mention right now, but the main singer sang and whatever, then the secondary singer went to sing, and it just sounded terrible, so harsh and ugly. And I was like, this is it was the U47 through a Telefunken V76 through a Gates stay level, it was a beautiful signal chain.
Yeah.
And it just sounded terrible, like really harsh. And I was like, something wrong, something broken. Should we change mics, change preamps? And I just said to the guy, can you sing a little less hard? And he goes, sure. And then, all joking aside, the next take, it sounded perfect. It sounded like and we didn't even adjust any of the gain.
It sounded just like the Beatles.
Well, no. When I wanted to sound like the Beatles, I did go out and buy like a AKG D20 mic and a D19, and those mics actually really kind of do make it sound like the Beatles, but not in a good way. A lot of those Beatles drum sounds are kind of horrible. So anyway.
Nice. Atom Audio can provide all your monitor needs, whether you are setting up a first-time home studio for recording music or podcasts, or a world-class studio for professional mixing and mastering. Their unique accelerated ribbon tweeter design is famous for creating smooth, detailed imaging that let your speakers disappear into your music, allowing you to focus on the mix. Learn how to set up your studio monitors and control room for great sound, plus lots of other cool studio tips at atom-audio.com/education. If you're ready to upgrade your studio to the famous sound of API's large format consoles, then you're ready for The Box, a small format console featuring the same analog circuitry and original 2520 op-amp design that has made API famous for 50 years. Record through 8 world-class mic pre-channels, mix through 24 smooth-as-glass faders, and upgrade your home studio to legendary status. API now offers a virtual console experience, allowing you to get a personalized online demo of The Box at apiaudio.com. Okay, cool. So let me see. I'm sort of leaping around here. Maybe we can talk a little bit about your studio, Peter. Tell us about that, because you also go out of your way to set a real vibe and a place that feels comfortable for making music. And it's more than just microphones. It goes as far as beds and pillows, I think, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I started working in the studios in New York in the early, like 1990, as an intern, then an assistant, then an engineer, and then I built a studio in my parents' basement, and I was there for quite a while, and finally I was like, I have to find my own space. And at the time, I just didn't understand how I could make it work if it wasn't a studio where people could stay. So the plan was to buy a big old house, which I found a really pretty great old house, and in a not great neighborhood, but good enough, in Bridgeport, which can be a rough town. But again, I think you mentioned earlier, it's a 7,000 square foot Victorian, and I wanted to have the studio on the first floor because the first floor was really beautiful. The old wood, finishings and stuff are really nice. But then I was convinced to put it on the third floor, partly because of safety. Like I don't know how you steal a tape machine from a third floor studio, but
also don't know how you get it up there.
it's brutal. But to make a long story short, it's been up and running now for it's hard to believe, over 20 years. And the third floor is the studio. It's a big control room. It's like, I don't know, 33 by 21, and decent live room, some ISO booths. And the second floor is all bedrooms. So they're now, I used to live there, and the house was kind of cut in two. Now I don't live there for the last 6 years. And so the second floor is 6 bedrooms. So there's 6 individual bedrooms for bands, which is really, and 4 bathrooms, which is really nice. So when bands come, they they don't only have a place to stay, they actually have their own bedroom, which I think means a lot over time. And the first floor is like a giant kitchen, a giant big TV room and stereo for the band. And then now what used to be the private residence is a second studio, where a buddy of mine, Kurt Leon, helps run that second studio, where he works independently for me a lot. But when I'm on a big project, or not a big project, but like an all-consuming LP, a lot of times we will have both studios running at the same time, and sometimes even a third studio in a bedroom running to do vocals and stuff like that. Because at the end of a project, I want to be mixing in the real studio, while there's still a lot of overdubbing to do. So that's when we get sort of the multiple rooms going. Did we do that much on your record? Did you guys record much downstairs or not? Because it wasn't we never got to the end. Don?
Oh, we have played that game in the studio previously too, of even going to the lengths of setting up an ISO booth as its own recording studio with a whole nother rig. And on this one, we took that to the extreme. With this many bedrooms to work with, there were times when there would be one band member up with Peter and his assistant, working on something upstairs or tracking, mixing, whatever was going on. And then there would be 3 other bedrooms that all had separate overdubs
comping.
Going on.
My God, that's right. You guys are the king of comping.
Yeah, we're
comping.
We're competent compers, and So I think at different points there were like 4 different rooms over the course of the house, in addition to where Peter was working, that would be going at once, and we'd be doing electric overdubs and things that don't matter for bleed issues or anything, could be happening anywhere. And we did a lot of orchestral stuff before and after the pandemic hit. Oyan in particular, did a lot of kind of like splintering off, and he'd grab someone and come in and be like, what about this idea for this bridge section? And then he would come in the next day with 16 violin parts ready to make a section. And it was a really cool workflow. And I feel like if the pandemic hadn't hit, we would have come out of it more relaxed than we had been at the end deadline for an LP. Like, we would have come out of it, I think, having, hit our targets a lot better. And as it was, the final 2-week session turned into months of figuring out what could happen and in what way. And thank you for bearing with us, Peter.
It was quite something. So when the pandemic hit, I think everyone took a couple of weeks off, because I think you weren't supposed to leave your house really. But then I think by the middle of April or the last week of April, we decided to start to try to mix the record. And we did that, by using that plug-in Listen To. So those guys could hear exactly what I was doing. And then we also would have a Zoom call open, with my iPad off to the side. And I believe we did that 5 days a week for, longer than I want to admit. It was more than a few weeks. So.
Yeah, audio movers. I've been using that a bunch this year too. And it's very helpful for streaming. I mean, I love to stream mixes over to the phone and hear it there. Or I did a similar one. I did a songwriting recording weekend, and one of the guys couldn't be there, so he was at a campsite up in St. Louis, and he was streaming. We streamed the entire weekend. I just had to remember to not say anything really bad about him all weekend. Don, tell us a little bit about what instruments you guys play as a band. What are the instruments that you're comfortable picking up and playing at a moment's notice?
We're dabblers, I would say, overall. Like, none of us are are virtuosos at one thing, which is fun, but it also is exhausting because there's this palette that you need to figure out for every song, and it could be just about anything. So I would say, most of us play some guitar.
Mm-hmm.
I do a little more electric guitar, experimental stuff, but only because everybody played acoustic guitar to start with. I play banjo. Oyan plays a little banjo too. Oyan plays mandolin and violin are his primary live instruments. Harris's primaries are cello and guitar. Dave plays bass and kick drum in the live arrangements most of the time. We all sing. Dave, Harris, and I usually do keyboards, sort of with varying levels of actual piano playing to just, experimentally figuring out pad tones and things like that. I play a little bit of steel. We have some weird, like a mandocello and a mandola that we've used in the past. We do some baritone guitars and kind of weirder tuned instruments like that. What am I missing, Peter? Anything?
You indulged in a lot of the things lying around my studio.
Yeah.
Did we use the vibes?
I think I heard some Mellotron on the record, didn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely, Peter had just gotten a Mellotron, I think.
Keep Coming Home had some Mellotron flutes on it.
Yeah, that's a combination of Mellotron flutes and actual clarinets, I think.
Okay, and then there was one the same song actually, Keep Coming Home. I was actually struggling to figure out how to ask the question, but in the bridge, it sounds like a million chopsticks playing strings or something. It reminds me of the Marxophone, and I wondered if you wanted to explain how you created that sort of blooming of fast cascading effects.
I wonder if Peter even knows.
I don't remember. I know Oyan did some crazy stuff actually with the bow on his violin that was funky. But what is that particular sound?
Could it be echoes and delays added to stuff also as part of the mixing?
I think it is not. I think it is not a delay thing. Yeah. I believe that was a comp of multiple takes overlaid on each other of playing, spiccato, col legno, the different techniques where you're using the back of the bow.
Yes.
Spicoli? Didn't Spicoli order the pizza in class?
No,
what is that?
You dick. That I had to fight for that. Remember, someone wanted that off at one point, and I was like, no. This is so cool. If that's the part I'm thinking of. So
yeah. It sort of sounds like a rain stick in a way.
Yeah.
But it's. Right. I think it is like. We've had Oyan do a lot of things. Sometimes it actually really mucks up the instruments, but bowing a banjo is a sound you hear a few times on the record. He uses the back of the bow tapping on the mandolin strings. Sometimes I think that is what you're hearing on that particular.
Probably bouncy, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Those bouncy sounds, a lot of those are different techniques of using the bow against strings, maybe not even of the violin. So
very cool.
We should mention that I almost forgot that Thomas Bartlett plays on this record as well.
Right.
I don't know if you know who he is, but he's this ridiculously talented guy who plays keyboards on every cool band's record. I mean, he really is an unsung hero, but he plays some mellotrons, some piano, some OP1 on the record. And just, he's a master at, building something from the ground up or just jumping in at the very end and just sprinkling the old fairy dust. But I think you'll agree, Don, that his stuff was pretty cool.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. I mean, that's where I felt like my instrument on certain songs was editing things together from what Thomas had played.
Right.
Like either taking it as exactly the way he played it and just saying, great, this makes the song, let's mute down some other stuff to highlight this, or saying, this is cool, but not where he played it. And let's try this, but reversed and put on the second verse instead, that kind of thing.
Nice. Without a doubt. And I've had Thomas play on countless records of other bands, and that's exactly what I'm doing all the time. He sort of gives you this raw material that you can just do whatever you want with, affect it strangely, move it around, change the parts, loop it, whatever. But he's like a totally unsung hero of the National. The National's records would not, at least many of them, most of them wouldn't sound the way they do without him.
Yeah.
But anyway.
I mean, that's the same process, just thinking about it with once we went full remote, Oyen has been the least engineering savvy band member. So we kind of got him up to speed with how to track some of these things. And then he just went wild. Like he got into Logic. And like I showed him some of the very beginning things. And then he just started looking stuff up and saying, what does Kishibashi do that's amazing, that's experimental on violin, and how can I quickly do that? And then he very quickly was reversing violin sounds or slowing down the whole track, using Verispeed and tracking to that, and then speeding everything back up. So now it's an octave up and like getting into all these fun effects. And then generally the workflow was that he would send me a whole mass of that stuff, since I have both Logic and Pro Tools, which is where Peter was working.
And then the speed up was Logic? The slow down speed up stuff is built into Logic?
Yeah, you can do it in Pro Tools as well. You can, record at half speed, and then just when you play it back, it's this magical otherworldly thing.
Yeah.
Every DAW has a way to do almost everything that you would want. It's just, what are you comfortable with? That's at least my take on it. So yeah, I would sort of translate Oyen's Logic sessions, which were just like amazing, but way too much, purposefully. And then I would condense it. I would do one round of condensing and kind of positioning things. I'd send it to Harris in our band, who was kind of like the one who was the direct conduit to Peter a lot of the time. So he would have Peter's session, would open it up with all of the all the UAD plugs and all of the things we had in common. He'd open all of that up and now be able to hear it in context and sort of take my consolidation and consolidate it a step further. And then we'd send it to Peter and sort of see how the mix came back and then make adjustments as needed. But that's I do consider editing to be its own instrument in a way. It's like it allows me to even write songs with instruments that I can't play. But it means that I'm coming up with parts that I never would have come up with because they're almost too rudimentary or something.
Mm-hmm.
That's
where all these inspiring.
All these different styles of music are sort of melding now. I mean, there are many types of music that are built solely on editing, really. But just because, you play live acoustic instruments doesn't mean it has to be, pure in that sense. So, I have much more fun chopping things up and playing with them and moving them around than just performing into a microphone.
Right on.
But yeah, that's one of the cool things about Don's band is they do perform in a very live way, and sometimes even into one microphone. But then they just want to screw with it.
The Spectra 1964 Custom Shop now offers the STX 100D, the big brother to the now famous STX 100, a fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers. The STX 100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Arden, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 comp limiter, then check out the new STX 600 modules, combining the STX 100 mic pre and C610 in a single 500 module. That's how you're hearing my voice. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and comp limiters. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. Whether you're in the studio or working remotely, the Envoy Pro FX from OWC lets you record from anywhere with confidence. It pushes USB technology bandwidth to the max of 2,800 megabytes per second over Thunderbolt, giving you high-speed audio data and recording and playback. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for the road, the OWC Envoy Pro FX is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Creativity without limits, only from OWC. Imagine never having to worry about your external drive interface again or compatibility from studio to studio. Find the new Envoy Pro FX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. iZotope is a secret weapon for your studio that can help you get consistently pro-sounding mixes. And now you can get access to all their plugins through the new subscription options. Only $24.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, tonal balance control, visual mixer, and much more, including free plugin updates. Or for only $19.99 per month, you can join Producers Club to get a suite of industry-leading production, mixing, and mastering plugins, custom presets, royalty-free samples, production courses, and more. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guests today are Donald Mitchell and Peter Cadis joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. You guys ready to jam?
Oh, yeah.
Let's jam.
All right, let's jam. Don, you were talking about editing before the break, and you also mentioned being a masterful comper. What are some things that you've learned about comping vocals? Like what tips would you want to share about how you make it easy instead of hard to comp vocals?
There's no answer. There's no answer that makes it easy, but go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's just, how can it be hard, but in a way that actually yields something that's useful? I guess that's the one, because the worst thing is to do something hard and have it still not be good.
Right.
And I will also defend myself slightly to just say, I said I was a competent comper.
No,
I was mostly for the pun. Not for, oh, sorry, you said it. Okay,
I said you guys were the kings of comping.
So there you go, the kings of comping.
Yeah. It was nothing immodest on your part.
Did John Travolta star in that one? I can't remember.
I mean, I think that over the years, Pro Tools is definitely where I got into heavy vocal comping first. And that because that was the band vessel. And that's also what Peter was using at the studio. So that worked out well. But I think the biggest jump for us in our vocal comping was probably when clip gain came into Pro Tools, which I know was later than a lot of DAWs, but that, we would just split things up at useful points where we could then, that's helpful for if you have a lot of layers of harmonies, you can move around consonants, and being able to shift the volume of them sometimes allows you to not, if you could shift the volume of a syllable, sometimes you don't have to tune the vocal. Whereas if you first heard it, you'd just be like, oh, that take is gross. Mm-hmm. But you can have a lot of control if you split it up just so. So I kind of will do a really rough, I'll try to go really fast on a first vocal comp of something and then kind of take a break from it and have it not be as fresh in my mind. And then when I come back at it, that's when I'll kind of do some basic leveling so that when it hits a compressor, it's not going crazy at a few moments and then the rest of the time doing nothing,
Can I reference the old days again? I remember when Sound Tools first came out, that was the first digital editing I ever saw.
Yeah,
I know of existing. And then there was a 4-track version. It's oh my God, can you imagine if you could have a multi-track version of this? And now that's what everyone has, every garage band. So that's kind of mind blowing. But in terms of what was I going to say about the clip gain and stuff? Oh, or you're saying little volume rides of different notes. If you do it the right way, you don't need tuning. I remember again many, many years ago, someone would say, well, if there's a pitchy note, this is long before really anybody had the ability to tune anything. If there's a pitchy note when you're mixing, just pull the fader down a little on that note and push it back up. And what are you turning it down? Is it going to make it more in tune? Yes, it does. It absolutely does. So that kind of thing I think is pretty legitimate. And it's just such a different world now too, because I think if you told people now how we recorded vocals 25 years ago, they'd be like, are you insane? You'd punch vocals, oh, okay, that was really good, but I'm going to record over it now, or I'm going to record over this line, or I'm going to record over this word or this syllable. You were constantly just, erasing what you just done. And now it sounds absolutely frightening, but
yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah, and
But
then also just that sense that like you're going to somehow nail it, or that you can even keep a sense of perspective in your head while you're listening that many times to even know when you've got something good.
I know,
Yeah.
but they were not great old days. I found that work very stressful. And I mean, like the end of a long vocal session, that you just be wiped out. Like, oh my God. Because I mean, what if the singer nails it and your punch is just not quite right, or it was a good punch, but it just doesn't quite work. It's horrible. The horrible old days. But
and what if you accidentally erased the whole thing after the session was over?
Well,
Yeah.
I've never done that, but those things happened a lot, And the last thing I'll say about comping is, there's sort of two sort of scenarios I like. One is where the band really knows what they want and they comp it themselves, and they're happy with it. Another scenario is they just want me to do it, and then it's this sort of you almost sort of go into a trance. I set up the track with the playlist there, and there are different ways to do it, but I don't mind making crazy Frankenstein comps of a lead vocal. So it's basically, if I don't want too many takes, but say there's 6 or 8 takes, and I will listen to, sometimes I'll listen to whole lines, sometimes I'll just listen to like a few words, and then I'll just first take, second take, third take, and I just sort of like in a trance go through, listen, and just every time I hear one that I think is the best, I'll shoot it up to the comp, and you'd think, well, doesn't a Frankenstein thing like that? And a lot of times too, like the sound will change because over 8 takes, we decided to lower the gain or this or that, or, even change mics sometimes. But believe it or not, I found that total Frankenstein comps can sound fantastic.
Yeah.
If you just choose like the best and the lines with the most expression, there's tuning, of course, but sometimes you just have a line like, wow, why does that have so much more expression? And so, yeah, I'm fine with super comps, but again, they are kind of soul draining and exhausting to do.
Do you find that when you're in that zone, you have to make a mental decision that you're like, I have a rule about what I'm going to choose. I'm going to choose the one that has the most expression, or sometimes you say, I'm going to choose the one that has that little, gritty edge to the tone on everyone and not the most expression?
It all depends. Yeah, it's one of those two things. And in the old days, it was much more about, which has better pitch. And to a degree, it still is. I mean, you can only tune a vocal so much. I believe there's very, 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 very little tuning on the Darlingside record, because the guys just wanted, what they do is the kind of thing where they just wanted to do it right. So, there's some records, you'd be shocked how everything is really tuned, even records where you wouldn't think so. But and
it's always easiest to just, if you can just sing it to get the thing you want at the beginning, that's always easier than having to comp your way into that solution later.
Totally what you want. But I mean, the funniest recording joke or Pro Tools joke I've ever heard is also the only one I've ever heard, I think, which is, what did the Pro Tools engineer say to the lead singer?
Sounds like shit. Come on in.
Yeah, exactly. That sucked. Come on in. Like that's hilarious, but it's also kind of bad, And with a band like Darlingside, Melodyne and shitty performances would not have worked. It would not sound like that record,
right
at all. So, but it was just to finish the sometimes the worst case scenarios where you're comping, where I'm comping at the computer and there's a room full of people and everyone has an opinion on each line, and it's
boy.
like this is not productive.
That's a recipe for melting your brain as an engineer.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, that's where I think within the band we've tried to just delegate it around different ways on different songs, but try not to be. Ideally, I don't like to have anyone comping their own voice, because you tend to be pickier about it, and if it just comes to you closer to being finished, then you're much more forgiving of making the little tweaks you need to make on your own voice. Whereas if you just hear the first take you put on, you're not pleased with it, then you're kind of sour towards all of the takes and you start to overdo it. So I think that's a thing where, getting multiple people who are good at editing, because it's not rocket science, it's something that you get familiar with very quickly, what those keystrokes are. Like I think if you can get everybody able to do that when needed, then that really can spare, I like the idea that I can hand something to Peter and be like, here's the performance. And he doesn't know how much it was comped or tuned or anything. Right. And now he can just focus on how do I make the best song using this performance?
Right.
Yeah.
Don't get, and he consolidates the track. So I don't see any edits. I don't know what the hell's going on. But I will say this too about, especially when a singer is really struggling, you can't let them be in the room when you're comping. Or comping and or tuning, because they're just going to have a meltdown. Like, oh my, they'll hear all their mistakes and just be miserable. Now, if you say, please leave and come back in an hour or whatever period of time, and you have painstakingly comped the vocal, then you have painstakingly tuned it in a way that doesn't seem too obvious, whatever, and then, literally cue, compression, de-essing, reverb, maybe, and put it in the mix, and they walk in and go, man, that's incredible. Wow, I didn't realize I sang so well.
Yeah, I really had a good day.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I was going to add to that. Another thing that I discovered about comping vocals is I find that it helps if I put it on my Oratone speaker in mono down really quiet. I don't know. I'm struck by it. I don't get drawn in by all the the flashing lights of the sound of the song, and it makes it easier for me to hear if the pitch is on or off. I find.
Well, I'm not fishing for a compliment, but Don, do I listen more quietly than any engineer you've worked with? Maybe.
Yeah, Peter definitely listens more quietly, and he definitely kicks people out of the room with abandon, which I think is a good and helpful thing, especially for our band, where we were going to get too in the weeds on something, kicking us out for vocal tuning for sure, if there was something that came around. Although most of that process, I think, got offloaded because of the pandemic and whatnot. But then also on mixing, Peter would kick us out and say, come back in 20 minutes. Let me at least get started on this without like the feeling of judgment. Like, even if we weren't paying attention, he knows that we're there and we might perk up at any moment and say, like, why are you trying that? That's not right.
Yeah. And Peter, have you ever noticed that, like, you'll be listening to something at low volume and then everybody starts talking and having a conversation? You're like, guys, I have the volume down not as an invitation for everybody to start talking in the control room. It's down for a reason. We're listening.
Well, for years and years, I used to be proud of the fact that I wasn't easily distracted, and there'd be all this noise and people looking right over my shoulder all the time. But then I grew to really think that's not good. And the reason I say that is if the band is in there, especially during mixing, if they're there for 2 or 3 hours while you're mixing, and then you turn around and say, what do you guys think? They'll be like, I don't know. But like, if they leave and they haven't heard a thing, and 3 hours later you say, come on in and listen, they'll come in and listen and be like, oh, again, wow, oh, wow. Like it'll really mean something to hear the song.
Yeah.
So
at that point, you turn it up unbelievably loud so that they're impressed regardless.
I don't do that. Well, I remember making a record once with this band, the Paper Kites. They're a band from Australia. And my main speakers for working at the time, kind of right now, are I have a set of near fields, these Neumann 310s, they're Neumann, technically midfields, but Neumann near fields, which are really nice, lush sounding, nice smooth bottom, but not too bright. And then my big speakers, my mains, are Dynaudio acoustic M3s. They're big guys, and they're loud and bright. And I mix most of the day rather quietly, and then sort of mid-level. And then it's only when we're kind of done or near done, or we're printing the mix, that I'll listen loudly on the big speakers, because you do have to hear it loudly also. Songs that'll show you, oh, geez, I didn't realize that bass drum's too big, or the vocals are too sibilant. But anyway, I remember playing back like one of the final mixes, like lead off track, and the lead singer was sitting there listening, and we played it on the big Dynaudios, and it was loud and bright. And he's like, no, I don't like it. It's too bright, whatever. I go, well, but remember, the speakers are really bright. And then we're talking, and then we played it back on the Neumanns a little quieter. It goes, this is much better. I'm like, I know, it's the same mix. It's just different speakers. And he's like, oh, okay. But that can be really hard to get your head around. It's like when I go to mastering sometimes and I don't know what the room sounds like, I'm like, oh my God, what have you done? It's like, nothing. So
I played your mix.
Right.
I let you in.
Peter, what's your thought? I'd be curious to know. Like, I noticed you still are a practitioner of the classic car test, right? Where you know your car really well, and it's quite different from what you find at your studio. And so you do listening there, and then kind of come back with feedback when we're starting something. Like, what's the theory behind that? And I guess I would also be curious to know what you think about mono checks and mono compatibility, especially like where even phones now that are like where an embarrassing number of people are listening to the music that we're making so painstakingly, that even those are not mono in a lot of cases anymore.
I like big checks, ones with many commas in them.
Yeah, okay. But I mean, that's a really good question. The reason I rely so much on listening to my mixes outside of the room is because my control room is not as good as I'd like it to be. And my control room is definitely not terrible. I've done a lot of treatment to it, but it's not a control room built from the ground up. I mean, that's the ultimate dream, that you have a control room where you can really trust the low end. You can really trust the high end. You can trust that what you're hearing is as accurate as it can be. And that's, I mean, no matter what speakers I buy or whatever, or other treatments I do, my room is never going to be all I want it to be. But then again, I don't want to trash, again, whatever the vibe. So I don't want to create like a funny little box either. It's hard to say, because I did actually just buy some new speakers. I just bought some ATCs, the 25As. And
those are big guys?
No, they're the little guys. They're not little, but the little ATCs, they're still, three-way. And they still have that ATC mid-range dome, which they have really great detail. I've only had them for a week or two, so I'm still trying to get used to them. Again, you get too deep into the weeds about gear. Speakers are. I remember when I was young and someone said, "Oh, the power amp is just as important as the speaker." I was like, "Get real," but it is. It can be, for sure. And more important than anything is your room. I've heard speakers sound incredible in one room and terrible in other rooms. Again, not to go on about it, but like in my home here, I bought some little Neumann speakers, like the smallest ones they make, self-powered speakers, and set them up in my TV room. And they sounded terrible. They had absolutely no bottom, and no high end really. And if you cranked them up, they sounded better, but still no bottom. I brought them to my studio and put them off to the side where I used to keep my NS10s. And all of a sudden they have huge bottom. Sometimes it doesn't even make sense. And so, yeah, the reason I've switched speakers from time to time is like when I got rid of my big console, I used to have B&W 805s, and they sounded great on the console. When I got rid of that and I put them on stands, they sounded terrible. They had no bottom. So anyway, it's this endless game. And ultimately, all that matters is that you find speakers that you can trust, and a space you can trust. And still not quite there. Maybe someday. But.
Nice. Well, let me pivot to a question we've got from one of the rock stars here. Is also actually an assistant on the podcast. This comes in from Hugh McDonald, also known as the artist Fairhazel. And he said to ask you, Peter, about your approach on mixing Kurt Weill's records. Which pivot back to all the stuff we're talking about here with Fish Pond Fish as well. But he said there aren't many elements going on, but somehow it packs a punch, and the mixes, especially on Pretty Pimpin', suits the song so perfectly. Sounds like a compliment. What are some thoughts that you have about getting the most out of the fewest? Like the less is more concept.
Well, I mean, the biggest problem, or the hardest thing, is when there's just too much stuff. So I love it when things are sparse. That's my never-ending battle with my best buddies, the National. Like, those sessions are so insanely dense. Sometimes it's just hard to know what to do. But Kurt Weill. Okay, to talk about it quickly. The most recent record I recorded, a bunch of the stuff and mixed a bunch of it. The record before that with Pretty Pimpin' on it, I was brought in at the very last minute just to mix a bunch of the record. That was a funny experience because the sessions came in, and at the time I wasn't super familiar with Kurt's music. And they were huge sessions, loads of tracks. And I was like, wow. But almost all of them were turned off. They were made inactive. I'm like, huh. And all that was left for the mix was really the live tracks. And sometimes that included a live vocal, like a scratch vocal. And then there were usually a few, overdub tracks, but not a lot, not loads of layering. And I was like, wow, this is weird. And we ended up mixing like 2 songs a day on that. And that's kind of unheard of nowadays. So I think they would cut their basic track. They really go for the live thing. And then they would do a lot of overdubs and say, these all suck, and turn them off. So it was pretty interesting. But what made it really strange though is on the next record he came in to actually record with me, and that was definitely a very different experience. The mixing was so easy, the tracking was trickier because at least at the time, what he did was he wouldn't show the band the song on most of them until they were sitting in the live room with their instruments on, headphones on, ready to record. I guess going for some kind of live energy, but it made for not a totally relaxed situation. And
no charts.
But I will say no, nothing at all. I think, and I will say this: we honestly used most everything that was played live from everyone, and we even used live vocals a lot of the time. I mean, I think part of the reason he gets away with that is because he sort of sings a lot. That makes it a lot easier. Otherwise, I mean, there are not many people in the world who can, sing a live vocal with a band and have it be the keeper.
Right. No, that can be a challenge.
But so anyway, Kurt Weill, he's a funky guy, makes funky music. And I think my dog is banging on the door. But I've grown to really like those records and those songs. And a lot of that stuff is definitely production-wise, sound-wise, dialed back a little. Their early mixes of certain things where I kind of pumped up the drums and stuff, and they didn't react so well. In fact, that's another funny thing to talk about for 10 seconds. Like sometimes when you're working on a bunch of different records at once or back to back that are very different stylistically, it's hard to readapt sometimes. I just mixed some major label thing that wanted to be totally like boom, pow, crack, and then the next thing was Kurt Weill who wanted to just really laid back and easy. And it's like, oh yeah, sorry, I have to reset my brain. So
yeah. It would be hard to describe in one sentence what gives records a legendary sound, but it would be easy to describe in 3 letters: API. For more than 50 years, API Audio has created large format consoles for world-class studios. Famous for co-founder Saul Walker's circuit designs and the original 2520 op-amp, the sound of API consoles is the sound of great music. API now brings that legendary sound to your home studio with the Box, a small format console featuring the famous API circuitry that is the perfect analog addition to your digital studio. The Box gives you 8 recording channels on the left with built-in mic pre's, high-pass filters, direct inputs, and customizable 500 module slots, and 16 summing channels on the right. Or you can mix using all 24 channels, including aux sends, inserts, and silky smooth faders. API now offers a virtual console experience with a personalized online demo of the Box, 16082 or 2448 consoles. Sign up for your demo now at apiaudio.com. Making sure your vocal sounds amazing in your mix starts with capturing your voice perfectly. This means controlling sibilants and plosives at the mic. Back when I started out, we used to make pop filters out of pantyhose and a wire hanger, but not only did it not look good or smell great, but it also didn't sound all that great either. There's a reason that the Beastie Boys said they never rocked the mic with the pantyhose. Fortunately, pop filters have come a long way in the studio, and Jay-Z Mics brings you the ultimate pop filter, built from solid metal parts that won't break and a flexible gooseneck for easy placement. The Jay-Z pop filter uses a unique waveguide design that prevents plosives from getting through to the mic while letting important high frequencies through for clarity. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. Don, are there any questions about any of the records that Peter's worked on that you want to ask? And then Rockstars, I want to remind you that we have a great playlist in the show notes. So click through there. There's a Spotify playlist where you can go click through and listen to a ton of these great records we're talking about. And I really appreciate, Peter, that you have a consistent consistent in a good way. Like there's a consistent coolness to all these records in your playlist. So I like what you're doing.
I appreciate that. That's always a weird thing to consider sometimes. Like, you have a signature sound. It's like, are you telling me all my records sound the same? No, you're not, but you do have to be wary of that for sure. I mean, you can only have so big a bag of tricks. But no, I hear you.
Yeah. Well, Don, do you have any questions about any records you want to interject?
I mean, one thing that I thought maybe, oh, geez, I guess, yeah, I'll pivot to a different question than I had originally planned for Peter, which was that I was curious, Peter, you've recently mixed national records in some really different ways, right? Because you have been there from the beginning of the process on some records. Other ones you've gotten stuff after the fact, but done it all in the analog domain. And then a recent record, I remember you mentioned to me, you had mixed all in the box at their request so that you could be on site with them and not have to, truck in as much gear. You've kind of done it all those different ways. I guess I'm curious, like, how do you find consistency when working on those, between those different threads, and especially with that, like, in the box versus outside of the box. And we did some of both on our record together as well. So I guess that is, I think, something people might want to hear about.
That's funny. I mean, to answer your question quickly, the very end of it, on your record, I think there was a song where you guys liked the rough mix so much that I was like, I can't get back to it. I just have to, through I have a pretty elaborate analog summing chain. And I was like, I'm just going to mix it in the box. And everyone was happy and it sounded great. So, I mean, I think for so many years, there was this thought that analog is just superior to digital, which now it's just a very silly thing to say. I think they're just, they are what they are. But in terms of the national, the process in terms of making the records and my involvement has been every possible scenario. And one of the more recent ones was for that record, not the most recent one I mixed at their place. Didn't mix it in the box. I sort of brought some of my stuff and they had some new stuff. But that's not really of great significance. But the record before that, Sleep Well Beast, was mixed 100% in the box at their place. And of course, it's the only record I've ever worked on that won a Grammy. So I guess you don't need analog. Just kidding. But
right on. Apologies for not leading this off with Grammy-winning producer at the beginning of the intro.
Please. But what was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So I headed up there because, Aaron Desner from the National built a really, really nice studio in his backyard upstate. And he said, I really want you to come up and mix it up here. And I remember it was November 2016. I don't know if any of you remember what happened then, but the National had been at my house. We were there mixing Alligator, I think, when George W. Bush got reelected, and we were devastated. So that's the week that Trump got elected. So it's like, not again, but I believe I digress. So right. My theory was I will go up there, and after 1 or 2 days, I'll say, guys, there's no way I can mix this up here. And they would gladly, come back down to Bridgeport. I was very confident of that. But they bought some ATCs, these the 45s, the kind of pretty big 3-ways and they just sounded pretty darn good. In fact, I was like, these sound so good, there's no way these are going to translate, these mixes, I think. But I brought my minivan. I brought the mixes out to the minivan, and gosh dang it, they translated pretty well, pretty quickly. And it's like, oh no, I think I can mix this up here. And
I'll have to get a pair of ATCs.
I know, and I finally did. I didn't get the ones they had because it's a long story. They were just a little big for my application at the time. But I do think ATCs are rather amazing. But yeah. So in the end, does it matter in the box, out of the box? Or like printing to tape, not to tape. Yes, it totally matters, and it totally doesn't matter, and it totally matters, and it totally doesn't matter. Like some days, I could tell you, with all conviction that it's important, but other days I find it meaningless. So again, I think a good old buddy of mine, Alan Douchus, he's a mastered engineer.
Mm-hmm. He's been on the show too.
He is awesome, and I did a lot of records, mastered a lot of records with him early on, especially. And he's only a couple of years older than I am, but I would kind of look up to him and be like, what gear do I need? Like, what do I need to be better? Like, and I always thought it would be like a magical compressor or this or that. He's like, just record better bands. I was like, oh shit. And his other great line though is, in terms of analog versus digital, is just pick a format and get to work. there's no reason to. I love obsessing over gear, but if you do it for too long, it's meaningless.
So I think he shared the story about doing the Sufjan Stevens record that was recorded with a little 1/8" jack going in the wrong way, and like that's how at the wrong sample rate or something, and it was one of the greatest sounding records he had done.
That's funny. Yeah, Illinois. Yeah, the story about, because Sufjan's really good buddies with the National guys, and when they told me how he recorded it, I was like, that's bullshit. But apparently it's true. But he's a funny guy. I remember a friend of mine was mixing one of his more recent records, and he said every single track had Reverb on it.
Love it.
That's pretty hilarious.
Because Reverb's one of those plugins you can put on every track without having to buy the $25,000 new Macintosh.
Yeah, exactly. It's not it's not the world's the most classy plugin, but anyway, yeah.
Well,
it's pretty funny.
One of the effects that I heard on Fish Pond Fish, I think it was, and maybe elsewhere too, was just some really great sort of wobbly tremolo effects, just really playing with my sense of pitch on some of the background, mysterious overdub elements and keyboards and things. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about ways to get those sorts of effects, ways to subvert those percussion overdubs and those keyboards and create a sense of mystery in the background of the track.
Don?
Well, I mean, I think, Peter definitely added a lot on that front as far as coming in with production ideas and, putting a tremolo on something that was a little too static to kind of give us some sway that was gonna help with the groove of the song.
Like a tremolo guitar pedal or like more as a plug-in stage?
Sound Toys Tremolator comes to mind.
Yes. And again, I've given up on most tremolo in the real world, because I just love the control after the fact in the computer. And yeah, Tremolator is my tremolo choice, but
And apologies, I said tremolo, but I think I was meaning vibrato too.
Yeah, I think we found all different ways to modulate things, but I'll let Don continue. But I'm a huge fan of tremolo for the reasons he just said. It creates sort of additional rhythm, but more than that is it stops becomes it just creates a lot more space in the track. I mean, it's kind of mind blowing sometimes. So, but sorry, Don, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, like, I don't remember adding a ton of vibrato plugins and a huge amount of wobble warble stuff, but I would say that we tracked a lot of things with that in mind to begin with. I mean, that's the nice thing about having string players like a cellist and violinist in your band,
right?
Is those things have a wobble to them. Some of the synths we used, I mean, Peter has this Lowry organ at Tarquin that's
nice.
I believe it's a full quarter step sharp. Is that right?
Well, I bragged about that. I know exactly how sharp it was, but apparently things had changed over the years. So it's quite sharp.
I have the Symphonic Holiday upstairs right above my head right now while we're doing this interview.
Nice.
There you go.
Nice.
So, I mean, that thing, even once you pitch it down the appropriate amount to get it to sit in with the track, and close your ears while you're tracking it to try to just assume that it's going to sound great eventually. Even after that, it still has this wobble to it that's beautiful. We have a Hammond organ that we picked up at a garage sale like the first year we started the band in 2010, I think. It was just free in someone's garage. Like, if you have a large enough vehicle to take this away, it's yours. And we've had that ever since. And we use that. And sometimes the foot pedal doesn't work quite right, which then makes it warble more and get raspier sounding. And then you get it in the right position and it changes the tone completely. It's one of those things. So, it's sort of embracing the idiosyncrasies of some of the instruments.
But to paint the picture slightly more clearly, so imagine you're doing the overdub on the Lowry, and eventually it'll sound good. But at the time, as you're performing it, it only has a built-in speaker, so it's up very loud. That's part of its sound. And so as you're performing it, it's a horrible semitone off. So it's pretty painful. So
I've worked with some singers like that. Okay, cool. Well, let's see. And I think that's one of the things that I really love. It's a great reminder about, this discussion of things being in tune. And sometimes, we think that the world is our oyster because we've got all these digital plug-in synthesizers and stuff. but you know, they're all sort of often too perfectly in tune. So it's really nice to use analog gear, and you get this layering. You get the really interesting chorus and stuff like that.
Another thing along those lines, that just came to mind was one of our secret weapon plugins, not Deverb this time, was called Sketch Cassette.
I was going to mention it.
Which Peter was reluctant to use because a previous, early build of the plugin had been crashing computers left and right, I think. But we got the updated version, realized that it did work, and at the suggestion of Greg Giorgio, who was assistant engineering for the Fish Pond Fish sessions, we got it up there. We convinced Peter to let us put it on the computer at great peril to everyone, and it turns out that thing is great. I mean, it reminds me of my teenage years when I first started recording just into a dictaphone, where you take something that might be pretty unforgiving if you just recorded it, on a hi-fi mic in a hi-fi studio, and it's dead, and it's like the tone is a little too pure, and it just like, it feels like karaoke or something. Like it won't sit into the track. It doesn't feel like it's in the same world as some of the other elements. And that Sketch Cassette, just being able to go through, and it's taking a lot of top end out and it's putting something in the back. It's not for your lead vocal, but for like a strings bus, if you're getting that feeling that like, oh, the strings feel piped in, they feel too Disney or something, finding the right layer of tape degradation. And I'm not talking about like a fancy, like Ampex, the Ampex ATR 102 plugin that's on all the mix buses. That's a really subtle one. I'm talking like, if you want the more severe, like let's really make this from a different time and place or something, that kind of play. And I've since gotten another plugin called Super VHS that does, a different era of that. And I think those are really fun to just be able to flip on, try some different types of tape and see if anything gets something that doesn't feel like it quite fits, to just like carve out the right set of frequencies that now sit it into the mix. And so that was one we had a lot of fun with.
That's very cool. Like, and I'm looking online right now, and it looks like pluginboutique.com has like both of those ones you just mentioned.
It's like the jump from film to VHS videotape. It was like, videotape just looked terrible compared to film because, you got used to the processed thing. It was too real.
Right.
Now, of course, VHS videotape looks cool because
I get the apps for my phone so that all my videos can look like they were done on VHS.
Oh God.
What's so funny? Just before I forget to mention it, Peter, you had recently gotten a demo of is it Neumann? It's the Neumann, the dummy head, the binaural head, right?
Yes. Yep.
So that was something we got to use. You can find some videos of that on our YouTube channel of us recording at Tarquin Studios using that Neumann binaural head, which is just an amazing thing. I mean, go listen to like some of the recent Perfume Genius recordings if you want to hear more of that as like a lead element. Mm-hmm. But it really just puts you in the space, sometimes in a spooky way that's too much. You're used to hearing Frank Sinatra and here's his vocal and it's on this mic and it's going through this reverb and like it's all placed, but the binaural head is just so naturalistic it can be spooky. So we use that mostly for layers of background vocals and atmospherics and things like that, and layered it in with close mic'd traditional vocals on a condenser mic. But that was a lot of fun.
Did you try the obligatory tubes coming out of the ears like Chad Blake on the drums?
What's that?
Oh, you don't know about it? Well, so, Chad Blake was always sort of famous for having one of those Dunkhoff heads, the dummy heads as well.
Yeah.
And you'd see these pictures where it's like a corrugated plastic tubing over the ears and then coming around and coming forward and pointed at the drum kit. And that was
I see,
a cool effect too.
That's, no, Chad's great. He's awesome.
Right on.
Last thing I would say also, you guys love this one plugin, not Vintage Verb, but Vintage Room. And I was like, well, what's the difference?
It was the Valhalla Room, I think.
That's it. Sorry, Valhalla Room. And Harris would want to put it on the mix bus, and I was like, are you nuts? But then I soon came to realize its power. It's actually a pretty cool plugin if you want to, like you guys often do, set stuff, not like add reverb, but just set stuff back a little into a space, into a room. And it's also quite good at making a mono source kind of stereo. but I was shocked by what a useful plugin that is. It
So
really is.
That's great that you pivoted that, because my next question was Fish Pond Fish has a lot of great room reverbs. What do you like to use? And you'd been beating up Deverb. So what are some other favorite reverb things or other ways that you use the Valhalla stuff?
I'm going to say quickly, first of all, I still use Deverb from time to time just because I can. It's not terrible. I'm not a snob. Yeah, reverb is a weird thing. Like in general, like, you know, I used to talk a lot about, you know, the first Interpol record. Some of the only reverb on that largely is just an Alesis microverb. And cheap, crappy reverbs generally sound better than fancy, expensive ones because they're, again, like too polished. So,
they speak in sort of with a mid-range character too, I think.
And there's not too much, you know, fancy high end. Fancy high end is what, you know, annoys people, I think, or impresses people, depending on what you like. But the last thing I'll say about reverb is I do own an EMT 140 plate reverb, and again, there's so many reverb plugins that all sound great, but there's something about the real plate that does sit differently in the mix than any plugin I've ever had. And it's like my one holdout with analog stuff. Like I have a lot of tape delays, and I just use the plugins now. Usually, it's just so much easier and sometimes better, more controllable. But the real plate reverb, for some reason, you can put it on a lead vocal, and it just sounds more natural, and it just sits in the mix in a less conspicuous way. So that's one of the only things I'll say. Otherwise, you know, I think there's so many great plugins out there. Oh, a big shout out to another free plugin is the Black Spring. That thing is great if you want a crappy. Yeah. I mean,
that's the Avid plugin, isn't it?
Yeah. It just, you know, and I think that thing can be super useful.
I used that for a dub record I was mixing, and it was the perfect thing for the snare.
No, real on snare. That's funny.
Yeah, it just had all that massive boing.
Do you know the most recent Brian Fallon solo record I did?
I don't. Not yet.
It's actually a really cool record. And anyway, you know, again, that's a record where being too fancy would have sounded very silly. So I think that this Black Spring, not the plate, the Black Spring is the reverb on almost every lead vocal on that record. And it just works great.
Which record is it? I pulled him up. I'll put it in the playlist for us.
Brian Fallon.
We got Rockin' Vibes, Brian Fallon No, never mind. I'm just trying to interpret Spotify here.
No, the newest one.
Long Ride Home?
No.
Local Honey?
Yes, that's
Local Honey. All right, cool. Yeah. It's going in the playlist, rock stars. Go check it out. I mean, after we're done talking.
I think to get back to your question about room reverbs too, Lidge, though, like the Valhalla, the trick we have used on that one mostly is it's almost never being used. Like we'll use that to set back certain elements in the space. You know, it's largely just like it has a depth knob on it controlling, you know, the early and late reflections. And so that just helps you to position things. And then on the mix bus, that particular trick that I think Harris has grown fond of is like, it's a glue thing. You know, it's not for creating this whole, you know, big effect where you'd be able to pinpoint like, oh, we're now in this type of room. It's just something that's consistent across the board. And you're mixing in like, I mean, I remember toggling that on and off on Listen To with you, Peter, and at like, you know, 7%, 6%, and like, you know, figuring out exactly where it was going to be totally imperceptible, but just have it not feel like everything was super close to you when you're listening to it, like a lot of people do, you know, in like earbuds or something, that it's not just going to be like drilling into your brain.
Well, and I think it's important to point out that we're not talking about using it like a traditional send and return reverb. You know, you're not sending to it on another aux, and you know, you're actually just putting it right on the bus. You know, I think that's important. And I know years ago, I thought that was an amateur move. You don't put reverb right on a track. You know, you send to it. But now I put reverbs and delays all over the place. It's much, to me, I consider it a drag when I have to do it the old-fashioned way. But I still do that sometimes. You know, like on a guitar bus, have like the BX10 spring there or something. But
no, I'm with you on that, because sometimes you want, sometimes when you use it on a send and a bus, sometimes I find it really challenging to make a bold move with the reverb. You know, it's like you kind of need it to go through the shit to sound great.
I think so, yeah, for sure.
And you can do both essentially. Like that's what we were doing most of the time, Peter, was like, you know, using Valhalla Room to like make sure that that like annoying electric guitar part that would be like just too repetitive, that it's just like, get that farther away from me in space. And then meanwhile, you've got the EMT plate on the vocals on a traditional send return because you have to,
Yeah,
Right.
and then of course, if you put it on the track itself, then you could always put the compressor after the reverb, and that can be a really cool special effect as well.
All different things, yeah. And with my plate, obviously, I print my plate. I never have a session where it's open. I'm a big fan of everything being totally recallable, because it always has to be. We revisited these songs countless times.
Now, do you find that yourself printing multiple versions of the plate though, because you have to remember to print one without the vocal sand and that kind of thing?
Because I don't. I use it for lead vocals and background vocals, and not that much else necessarily. But sometimes I'll have to print multiple versions, but in general, no.
Yeah.
There were times on this record, Peter, I remember, where you had printed the plate, and then we went and said, we don't want that high part on verse 2. And meanwhile, it's already been printed into the plate, and we forgot to reprint. And then when we would come back to it, we'd be like, I can still hear that high part, but now it's cool because it's just the reverb, where we actively chose to keep it.
Yeah, nice.
Mastering is a guilty pleasure. It's been phenomenal to hear a client tell me that the master wasn't just perfect, but it was right. It connected. I love assisting with the mixing process by giving free feedback, just because, if the mix feels some positive impact from my input, frankly, it'll be easier to master. At least 50% of the mastering is preparing the mix. If the mix is really good, most of the mastering is already done. It's much more of a conversation now from end to end. It shouldn't be a black art that's hidden behind closed doors. Shouldn't be a one-shot deal either. Even after the master is delivered, we can still work on it. We can even go back and make mix changes later and update the master for a fraction of the cost. That's the iterative master. I'm Brian Murphy of Sound Porter Mastering. Let's talk about how I can help elevate your mix into the best master possible. Contact me and get free feedback on your mix or a free master demo at soundporter.com.
Atom Audio designs monitors with a mission to bring accuracy, transparency, and high definition to your studio, guiding you each step of the way on your journey from starting out in a home studio to installing your ultimate mixing setup in your pro studio. Check out their complete line of speakers and headphones, from the T-Series to the AX Series to their top-of-the-line S-Series, which all use the unique ART accelerated ribbon tweeter design, famous for creating smooth, detailed imaging that lets your speakers disappear into your music. Want to feel awesome to make brilliantly accurate creative decisions in your mixes because you can finally hear your music clearly? Your ears are the greatest instrument you have, and if you can hear the music, then you can mix the music. Learn how to set up your studio monitors and control room for great sound, plus lots of other cool studio tips at atom-audio.com/education. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to start mastering your own records? Rockstars of Mastering walks you through exactly how I mastered my own record using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. Want to learn how to create a mix that doesn't suck but rocks instead? At Mixmaster Bundle, I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins so that you can have punchy, powerful drums, guitars that rock, bass you can feel, and a mix that is in your face. Plus, it's totally free as my way of saying thanks for listening. Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now and look for the clickable link in the show notes below. All right, so Don, let me pivot a question back to you. Getting out of the studio for a second. Talk to us a little bit about writing songs for this record. Do you have a routine? Well, A, am I out of place to ask you about writing on this? But B, do you have a routine for writing if you're the writer on this stuff? And then, somebody once told me, ask what you do in the morning. What's your morning routine? Like what do you eat for breakfast if you're the writer?
Right. Well, in our band, one of the strange time-consuming things is that we're all writers, and so we kind of collaboratively do it. It's sort of why the lyrics are as surreal sometimes and as kind of like subconscious as they are, where it doesn't always tell you a direct story. There are definitely exceptions to that, but part of that's because we try to just we follow some of the morning pages stuff that you might have read about from like The Artist's Way, where we do a lot of brainstorming, where we try to turn the editor completely off, get some stuff out there. But we do that with 4 people. So we kind of pool together all of our brainstorms.
And you don't read your own brainstorming. You forward it to the other guy. You each get to read the other ones, right?
Yeah, a lot of the time. This record in particular, we got into a game where we would like choose a topic, pass it to your right, and then you get a topic from the person to your left. And now you brainstorm on that. Just prose, kind of journal entry. Don't let the pen stop. Just keep thinking onto the page. And then pass that to the right. And then now you've got someone else's brainstorm. Now turn it into something that resembles verse that you could imagine being lyrics.
Yeah.
Whether that's adding rhymes or a meter, or just kind of segmenting it into fragments, rather than having it be all strung together. Just sort of take the greatest hits, maybe add some flavors of your own if you want to. But sometimes we would say, let's do this in iambic pentameter, just go high school English on it, whatever it was, just kind of, and the topic often was something pretty strange so that it would force you to write a brainstorm about something that, wasn't a classic rock song trope or anything.
And so then comment,
by the
John?
time, now go for it.
I was just say, we were using some sort of Google thing, and I was having trouble figuring out how it worked. And I was like, "Hey guys, are you sending me a lot of just random fragments?" And you were like, "Oh yes, sorry." Like, it wasn't just like a bunch of demos. It was all these little like abstract things. I was like, and now I understand what that was. But at the time, I was like, are they sending? Am I in the right folder? But anyway.
Wait, were you looking at? Was it text, Peter, that we were sending you?
No. You were sending me like all sorts of audio snippets.
Oh,
they were just, like.
Well, so that I think is a different thing. Which that's just the process of taking voice memos, which is, similar in that it's like we have these folders and just tons and tons of archives of everybody's ideas that they're just getting out of their brain so they don't forget them. Using whatever app on your phone just quickly gets it in there.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I guess the difference with this album was we've always been kind of a music first band where you hum something into your phone, then you start playing it on the guitar, then you take a recording of that and you kind of try everything out and gradually the song takes shape, and then adding lyrics is something that happens somewhere along the way. But usually the initial kernel was a musical fragment. On this album, we tried to start with lyrics sometimes just to really switch it up. And so that was where we came up with this telephone game of kind of like a prompt, a brainstorm, of versification, and then finally at the end, now it's back to, now it's on the last person and they try to set that verse to music, not necessarily verbatim, but kind of just try to come up with melodies. Sometimes, like Harris is very fast at just coming up with all kinds of, so he would sometimes send back like, well, here's 3 different melodies based off of these lines that were sent. And, and then we put that all in the hopper and kind of, some of them were almost fully formed songs. Like Denver is one song on Fishbone Fish that came out of that process pretty much fully formed. We tweaked, I think, maybe one line in it, but it just came out of that. And each step in that process was very fast. It was like, take a half an hour and brainstorm. Okay, now take a half an hour and add verse, that kind of thing. So that was very efficient for that song. And for lots of other ones, it just yielded like a tiny fragment that we kept and everything else got scrapped. So
I think it's cool because I think those exercises, they make music making fun on the one hand, like you're working on a puzzle and not working for work. But I think they can also, in my experience, they can help you take your own worst enemy inside voice that's telling you can't say that, you're full of shit, and it sort of, it confuses that voice so that it can't get a hold of your creative process.
Yeah, definitely.
It becomes less like your lyric feels less like I'm the greatest person in the world is what you're saying or something like that. And more of an interesting story.
We're always trying to, I think, get past the cynic and the editor and all of that, and just get to something that is on your mind that you didn't even realize was on your mind, or that it doesn't have to be worthy of writing about. It's just whatever's inside. Like try to figure out what it is, and then grapple with it, whatever has come up.
Yeah, even though that lyric, I'm the greatest person in the world, is probably a pretty great lyric and somebody should be using that somewhere.
Well, that's, Peter has a band called Philistines Jr., and I think that's the lyric in all of their songs. Is that right, Pete?
Excuse me? We have some pretty absurd lyrics, but
That's great. Okay, here's a question for you, Don. Are you guys a fan of the Punch Brothers?
Yeah, for sure. I think at least a couple of us were very big Nickel Creek fans back in the day, so that was a natural thing when Chris Thile started doing Punch Brothers, and since then we've become friends with Noam Pikelny, and I think all of them are just such incredible players, and they do an incredible, very precise thing that's a marvel to behold.
Yeah, it is. It is. I've had the pleasure of recording them a couple of times at my studio and the National, in fact, and the Head and the Heart, Peter. They all came down through my studio at Bonnaroo, which I did for 15 years, backstage studio. But yeah, there was a thing that they would do, this sort of bouncing rhythmic polyrhythm. And I heard some stuff in your record that just sort of reminded me of that kind of cool approach to acoustic instruments. And so that I'll pivot that to you, Peter. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you like to record acoustic banjo and mandolin and acoustic instruments, as far as, again, like maybe the answer is, Lid, stop asking me about mics, or maybe it's, here's some really good things to think about when you're going to record acoustical stuff.
I mean, honestly, it's all over the place. I think back to when years ago when I was really trying to figure out what is there a best way to record an acoustic guitar, and of course there isn't. But I used to record it with two mics, my Neumann U47, very nice sounding mic, and this crazy old Altec 639. It's also called the birdcage mic. Nice. Which is actually like a dual element ribbon dynamic. But and if you listen to them while you were recording, you'd say, oh my God, the U47 completely blows away this crappy old mic from the 30s or whatever it is. And but then when it was time to mix the song, somehow that crappy mic just sounded better in the mix. Like it didn't have the wispy high end or the boom on the bottom. So for whatever reason, in the mix, you could hear the notes better of the chords. So it can be very confusing. I'm working on a record now with a band called Morningsiders, and it's a lot of acoustic stuff, acoustic guitars and stuff. And we've been bouncing around all over the place with what mics we use. A lot of finger picking stuff. A lot of times I'll use a condenser or tube mic, that because it could be so quiet. But lately, I've been using the Neumann binaural head sometimes. That can be cool.
Yeah, I'd use that a lot if I had it.
Yeah, but then there was a song yesterday where just something about the attack of the finger picking was annoying, and we switched over to a ribbon mic. And I think in this case, I have a bunch of really nice old RCA mics, like a 44 and a 77, and they're really cool. But I also have just what's the company? AEA, the R84. Very common mic, but that thing just does a great job sometimes. And we switched to that, and it, one of the guys in the band said, "Is that a little full sounding?" I'm like, "Well, it is, but believe me, this will be easy to mix." It just had a much softer, more natural sound. And I did just buy and used it for the first time yesterday. One of those, what are they called? I forgot the name of the company now, but it's called the Launcher. It's like a cloud lifter. It's like a little thing.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And, it boosts the level 25 dB, but actually also adds a lot of color. And my first impressions are that it's really cool,
How about did you ever get in? I seem to remember the Head and the Heart brought in one of those Ear Trumpet Labs microphones for our session. Are you familiar with those mics?
No. What is that?
Well,
we use those live.
Yeah. They're like, apologies to the creator of the mics,
Portland, Oregon, and they're condenser mics that are made out of like plumbing parts and bike parts and lots of fun things. So they have this vintage look to them, but they're designed. They're condensers designed for live use. So they have a little bit of protection in the back just for feedback resistance and they're tuned for it. But they sound great in studio too.
Cool, yeah, right, very cool. So, but to answer your question, yes, I use all different things for acoustic guitars. You just never know. And I'm lucky now that in recent years, for years I've been collecting instruments and amps and outboard and all this stuff, but I just didn't collect acoustic guitars until about less than 10 years ago. And I've been trying to make up for it, and I have a lot of acoustics now, and that's really nice to have different options, different colors. Like, I have a brand newish, Gibson J45, and then I have a 1948 J45, and they do not sound anything the same.
Yeah, it's amazing to me how different acoustic guitars can sound.
Yeah.
I mean, you listen to a record like David Bowie or something like that, and there's a sound to the acoustic guitars, and it took me a while before I realized it's because you have to start with that acoustic guitar to get that kind of sound,
Oh, there's some crazy bright sounds on some of those records that normally I'd think that sounds terrible, but somehow it's amazing. So yeah, it's very strange. And that's another thing, like you were talking about singing. If you don't know how to play an acoustic guitar, it doesn't matter what mic you use, it's going to sound bad. And
right.
Like yesterday, we were doing a song, and it was fairly strummed pretty strongly, and it sounded good. And there's one part that always sounded a little out of tune because I think of the way it was played. And said, "What if you just played that part a little more lightly?" And it's like, "Oh, that sounds great. What if you played the whole song a little more lightly?" And then everyone's like, "Oh my God, this sounds amazing, tighter." So,
tell us about your collection of guitar picks.
I often can't find a pick in my studio, which is pretty embarrassing. I used to carry picks and earplugs in my jeans little pocket, just in case, for all the years of playing shows, going to shows. And when the pandemic started, I stopped doing it. So now I don't carry picks with me anymore.
Where are they? No, but it's really fun when you discover, the difference between heavy, medium, and thin picks and how they sound on guitars. Or for the first time you try, you're like, what do you mean there's a rubber pick for the bass part? It sounds amazing, It's a lot of fun to have that stuff around and just play around with it.
Yeah, for sure.
So we're nearing the end of the podcast, guys, but let me hit a couple of our closing questions and let you each answer them in your own way. Let's start with this first one. With regards to maybe this record that you guys just did, and we'll start with Don. When you started out working on Fish Pond Fish, what do you feel like was holding you back? Usually this is a question that is more like 30,000 foot view, but if you guys want to answer it in the context of the past year and the record, feel free.
I mean, I think Peter helped us to see that one thing holding us back had been just, feeling like we needed something masterful to start from, as opposed to just building it off of something that had a good vibe and that inspired us to keep working on it. So that I think, like, that attitude of like, oh, well, you can't just build off this demo, was probably a thing holding us back that we got through really nicely.
And then Peter, what about you?
Things holding me back from the 30,000 feet. I mean, to touch on something we've talked a bunch about already in this thing is, in the early days, just obsessing over, if I don't have the right equipment, I can't possibly make good recordings, which, is not true. But there's that. And I mean, it's such a hard thing. If we're shifting away from the band thing, just the studio producer thing, like, part of the reason I always had to have a studio, I mean, or anyone has to, like, you can't just say, you know what, I want to be a producer. I want people to pay me for my opinion. Like, why would anyone do that? So it was really more a question of having a studio and then having people come record and then tricking them into listening to my ideas. And if they were good, they might listen more, So it's definitely been a long, slow, path to this place now where people actually give a shit about what I think,
and now we got you on the podcast to tell us all about it.
There you go.
And again, thank you guys for doing this. Do you feel like the time you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover a proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. When you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then get started at ultimatemixingmasterclass.com. You know what? You've already shared so many things, but I'll hit you both up because maybe you got something in mind. Peter, why don't you start on this one? Do you have another recording tip, hack, or secret sauce you want to share with the rock stars? Something they could use on their next session?
Oh, geez. Okay, hack. That sounds like my 12-year-old son. But yeah, I know what you're saying. I don't know. I don't have a hack, but like the thing, I've said this a million times, that the records that are the hardest to make and the least fun are where people have a really fixed idea of what they're going for, and they ignore cool things that happen in an attempt to sort of stick to the plan. And that almost never works in my experience, but if you go with the flow and it goes somewhere good, I just do that. I can't tell you how many times, I suppose there are people like Alfred Hitchcock who say they write out the film and storyboard it, and then as far as he's concerned, it's done. Then he has to go through the trouble of shooting it. I can't imagine being, I don't know, that talented or whatever like that. I just write something and this is it. It's, to me, the process of making the recording that's fun, and through that process that I arrive at really cool things. I can have an idea. Usually that idea fails, but through that process I arrive at something else that's probably cooler than my initial idea.
It's like, don't be asleep when it's happening.
Yeah. It's, and if it's better than what you had planned, even if it's totally the opposite, go with that. So.
Yeah. Don, what about for you?
Last thing, I work with bands like who get like a major label deal or whatever, and then all of a sudden they can take the time that they want and they become totally lost. Sometimes some urgency just to go with what you've got is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And if you failed at your initial concept, try it next time. Anyway.
How about for you, Don?
I think
tip, hack, or secret sauce.
Yeah, we've touched on this a little, but this is something that really came into focus with Peter, which was backwards mixing, right? Like starting from some of the really broad strokes treatment, like on the mix bus, and like having things feel good as you're going, instead of, I think when we first started recording, we kind of had this mindset that everything starts from the ground and you kind of build up, and at the last second, you're going to put on these magical things. And just in the meantime, you're going to just trust that everything's going to be cool. But by having some of those elements on at the beginning, just, not getting too granular with it, but just really kind of having, like letting yourself imagine the final product then helps you make better decisions in those early phases. And so I think backwards mixing applies also to tracking. You know what I mean? If we hadn't had that whole mix bus chain on and had that common set of like the UAD plugins and everything, if we hadn't had that on, we as a band almost always overtrack, right? Like the Kurt Weill thing where you overdub everything and then you end up muting it all down at the end anyway. Mm-hmm. We've definitely found some good things through overtracking, but it's pretty inefficient. Whereas sometimes you get a better sense of what you actually need or how much space there even is in a song if you've already done just enough of that global zooming out and coming back at the song with fresh ears and a little bit of processing on it that makes it like you can actually compare it to other things you've already done, and it just makes your decision making a little bit snappier.
Okay.
If you delay too much gratification, it's not any fun at all. So
right. Well, it's sort of like the guitar. It's like start out by choosing the right guitar and the right part, and then record it. Start out by choosing the right tone for the sound of this thing at the mix bus or whatever, and then start recording into it.
Right, and with a guitar, don't save the distortion for the mix. You're going to have the distortion while you're playing it, maybe some reverb, blah, blah, blah. So.
Right. Okay, so Don, I'll start with you on this one. You were talking about the lyrical stuff, the playfulness of creation. It's a lot of stuff to organize. What tips do you want to give to the rock stars about resources for keeping your shit together, keeping the record organized? Anything you want to share or talk about with that?
I mean, it's an evolving thing, and as we get more ideas, it gets harder to keep track of them. I think Google Drive has definitely been our go-to. We have our band version of it, and we add people to it when they're part of a project that we need to add them to, and we have spreadsheets for things like keys and tempos, and we have folders of voice memos and audio snippets that we accidentally sent to Peter at some point. You're welcome, Peter. And it also has, Google Documents that are, that we use to mark up lyrics. And so we just kind of, every time someone adds something to the lyric document, like that becomes the top. So you can rewind through the history and you never lose track of something. That's sort of in line with, Peter. Many times I would say, hey, Peter, just, I'm feeling really like we're at a cool point on this balance. Can you do a save as? And he would be like, I already did it. Save as is my middle name. And
I'm a big save aser. Yeah.
Peter Save As Cadis.
I mean, why not? Right? Like that's the thing that differentiates that is the benefit of working in this digital environment that we're in, as opposed to like what Peter was saying about punching in and erasing something that might have been the take and you just couldn't see it yet.
Yeah, just put one more S on the end of Save As and you get it right there.
Well,
yeah.
Right.
There you go.
Good one.
Thanks, man. I just made that one up.
Also, I mean, I think within that world of, like you were asking about vocal comping, that's another thing. Like you can basically do a save as of a vocal comp by just duplicate your current playlist and then keep comping.
Yeah.
And then you can always go back to that verse. So we do that anytime something major happens. If you're going to apply tuning even to a note or two, and even if you're very confident it's going to work, just duplicate it and then tune that version.
And now do you give a new name to that version?
Sometimes we usually just, it's fairly linear where usually the tuning happens towards the end if you still feel like you need it once you hear it in a mix and that kind of thing. So you can usually tell because it's like these two are in order and it's like number 4 is the comp, then number 5 is the tuned version of the comp, and then number 6 is with a couple tweaks to that comp, and it sort of goes up from there. But
okay.
But like just having all those versions, yeah, you've got a lot of duplicate audio, but hard drive space is cheap, man. You just keep saving.
Yeah.
And so and the save as doesn't take any space at all. So
yeah, exactly. Nothing. So yeah, I think that's those are mainly the workflow things that we've done. I guess in those Google Lyric documents, you can track all the changes too. So if you make notes, you can highlight things that you like or don't like, or make little comments in the margins. You can do all the things you would on a sheet of paper now, and that works pretty well.
I'll offer something about Google Docs that I feel like it was a lesson I wish I had learned early on. G Suite is a thing that pops up every once in a while where you're like, why would I need to pay for this thing that's already free? If I could go back and do something over, I would have immediately started with paying for G Suite, because it does seem to have features that make it easier to work as a group and stuff like that. And I think I would have gotten more space and all that. So I'm just throwing that out there for listeners.
What kind of features are we talking, Lich?
Well, it was just more, I got more storage space by paying for it. It let me have a domain name and use my email and have that show up directly within Gmail. So it's like I'm sending, my Lidge at Recording Studio Rockstars email will send through and return through Gmail and through the G Suite instead of having to go through my website separately, and that sort of stuff. And then I think it makes it easier for collaborating as far as having a bunch of people have access to the same folder and stuff like that.
Yeah, gotcha. Even more important with the remote workflows that are going to be persisting for at least a little while.
Yeah. How about you, Peter? What kind of organizational comments would you like to make?
Well, just along the lines of what Don was saying, I think one of my big things is in the studios to try to communicate to be less uptight, and that said, I am, quite anal in terms of, certain, protocols and standards of how I organize a session.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's some things if you want it to be mean, you could say are OCD, but they're not. Like I will only pan things to certain numbers. I'll only set volumes to certain numbers. And I think that just started because sometimes, and you can look at it either way, but when I see people just pan things like randomly, volumes random, it just felt too random. And so now if I open a session and someone has tinkered with it and changed stuff, I can sort of immediately tell. So it's this combination of not being too uptight, but also having, a certain type of fastidious nature. And I think of one time I made a couple solo records with Paul Banks from Interpol, and he was making all these elaborate demos on his laptop. And I was like, well, what happened to that cool thing you had last week? And he's like, oh, I changed it. I'm like, well, go back to the session from then. He's like, what? Like he'd never occurred to him to do a save as. Yeah. So anything he did, he was destroying what he had. I was like, I can't imagine being that fearless anymore. It's
I worked with an artist who did that too. And not only did he not save as, but he would reconsolidate every single move on the track. So there were never any playlists either.
Oh my God. It's
bold moves. Okay, well, guys, we're at the closing question. This one is hypothetical. And I'll start with you again, Don, on this one. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. You're going to go back in time and find yourself early in your musical recording career. And you say, listen, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day. What advice would you like to go back and give yourself back then?
I mean, I feel like we're a broken record on this. It really would be, for me, just saying, don't treat this as a subject that requires mastery before you can make stuff. Mm-hmm. Just like, I guess the fearlessness of just assuming that you will learn any techniques and like scientific, technical know-how, that you will pick it up along the way in the process of making stuff.
Like, don't wait for permission.
Yeah.
How about for you, Peter?
That's such a broad question. I'll answer it in a very limited way. I think, very early on working in a studio in New York, I was like, oh my God, there's just so much to learn. How could you possibly learn it all? I remember just like fishing through all the parameters on a Lexicon PCM 70, like, because it's like windows within windows within windows, just with little LED and the buttons, and then or all the things on a 480, and then at one point I realized you don't have to learn everything about everything. In fact, who gives a shit about a PCM 70? And I felt better.
And now there's even more stuff. I mean, in one plugin alone, there can be, especially stuff like sound toys. You pick the tremolator, like you said, and there's so much to learn just in one plugin.
But that's not too bad. PCM 70, toggle through that thing. It's nightmare.
Well, I always remember the H3000. I felt that way. I was just like, oh man, there's so much to go through there.
So I like imagining, Peter, that in the, like for instance, I was delighted to find in trying to recreate a saturation thing from Tarquin, I discovered in the Culture Vulture UAD plugin, I discovered a Peter Cadis preset that was like, I hate my parents or something. And I was like, okay, well, I got to know what this sounds like. This is getting inside the psyche of the producer of the album and his relationship with his, like the whole thing. But I'm imagining now if there were a PCM 70, if there were a plug-in version of that and the Peter Cadis preset just was the default,
It'd just be fuck you. Yeah. So, is this a kid show?
No, we're good.
Okay. I can't remember what I was going to say. The whole thing about presets. I've been asked to make presets for a bunch of UA stuff. And like a lot of times I just had to say, I can't, because some presets are such a joke, like presets, I think, for an LA2A or a 2-band EQ, or 3-band EQ. But that said, I'm a big fan of fishing through presets on plugins that are new to me, or just as starting points to certain things. So it's funny, some people I know, like, I don't use presets. Like, I use presets all the time. I certainly may tweak them, but so I think it's a good way to learn what a plugin can do.
I can't even remember what all the presets are on things. There's so many. But also, we forgot to paint a picture there, Peter, because you were describing going through the menus of the PCM 70, and you forgot to say that you were sitting cross-legged on the floor of this control room while you're doing it, right? It's always like down in the lower rack of the studios.
I was on my knees. Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks so much for being here on Recording Studio Rockstars. This was a blast hanging out with you, and I really enjoyed having the three-way conversation all across the globe here. Let the Rockstars know, where can they go find Darlingside's new record, Don, and Peter, where would you like them to go to learn more about you? And what if they need a great producer for their next hit record?
There's a new thing called Google, and you just type my name in, and there you go.
And we'll have links in the show notes as well. What about for you, Don? Where can they find your record? Anything you want to let them know about? This will come out later than we do the interview, but any exciting stuff coming up this year for the record?
I mean, it's on all the places that you're already listening to the music. If it's not there, then let me know and I'll speak to our people about it. But yeah, you can find it on Spotify and YouTube and anywhere else that you want to go. Darlingside.com has our all of our kind of like bio and merch and tour dates, if they were to exist, aggregated in one place. So
yeah. And what's the gig that you would like, if you could play any gig for your next gig, what would it be?
Oh boy. Yeah, I feel like I want something low pressure. I want to play like a house concert to all my best friends just to like remind myself that I remember how to do anything.
I'd like to remind myself that I have best friends.
Yeah, there you go.
Right on. All right, guys, thanks so much for being here. Look forward to meeting you both in person up northeast there somewhere. And be well. Thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Take care.
All right, guys. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. Sound Porter Mastering, OWC, Atom Audio, API Audio, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and JZ Microphones. Remember to get your free mastering demo at soundporter.com and use the coupon code ROCK10 at Isotope for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your 7-day free subscription trial to get access to lots of their plugins. And use the coupon code ROCKSTARS at jzmic.com for 20% off this very pop filter you're hearing right now for a limited time. You will find links to all these wonderful sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars: Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, Hugh McDonald, and John Richardson for additional podcast and video production. You guys rock. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.